Eccoci qua, buongiorno, buonasera, buon pomeriggio, a secondo di quando ascoltate. Abbiamo un ospite d'eccezione, allora la conversazione sarà in inglese. Il signore che vedete lì è Ricardo Hausmann, vecchia conoscenza, vecchio amico da tanti decenni. Riccardo è professore a Harvard, è stato presidente dell'Inter-American Development Bank, l'ho conosciuto tanti anni fa in quella funzione, e prima cittadino venezuelano ed è stato anche ministro dell'unificazione, come dice lui, del suo paese, ministro del tesoro. E niente, Riccardo in questo momento si trova in Messico e gli ho chiesto di dedicarci mezz'oretta per fare il punto da venezuelano, come dire, che conosce la storia del suo paese, sulla situazione e sulle prospettive. Adesso passiamo all'inglese. Okay, so Ricardo, welcome and thanks for taking time with us. What's your take on the situation? Is it gonna end tragically? Is there a chance that Maduro will back out or back off or anything in between? What's your view?
Well, first, I think it would be useful to understand the political earthquake that the July 28th election represents. It would be useful to start the story with the election of 2006, when Chavez won with 62% of the vote in his third election. And even in that election, he lost in Caracas, he lost in Maracaibo, he lost in the major cities, but he won 62% nationwide. In this election, there was massive voter suppression. Venezuela has seen 8 million of its citizens leave in the last decade, and Maduro essentially took away our right to vote, those of us Venezuelan citizens who are abroad. So it's at least 4.5 million people who were impeded from voting. And he also did not allow much time or much easiness for people to register to vote, whether because they're young and need to register or because you change your address. So there was a lot of voter suppression. In spite of that, in this election, the opposition, according to the results that we have on 83% of the precincts, and according to exit polls and according to everything, the opposition got 67% of the vote and won in every single state of the country. Won in all the major cities, won everywhere. So if you look, regions, rural, urban, poor, rich, the results are incredibly similar. If you look at exit polls, they ask questions about age, gender. It's all massively homogeneous across the country. The country has been politically reunified in opposition to Chavismo represented by Maduro. So it's quite an accomplishment, if you want, that there has been a reunification of the country, of saying we don't want this, we want something else. And it did not become atomized in many different forms of opposition. It was reunified in a single opposition, thanks to the fact that the country had a primary election in October of last year that the government tried to boycott. So it was organized by civil society without the electoral authorities, and it led to a very strong mandate for Maria Corina Machado. So you have a unified political movement that is across the country. And that strength caught the regime by surprise. I must say, it also caught the opposition by surprise. And suddenly we realized that even with the voter suppression, we are a huge unified majority. With the voter suppression, it would have been upwards of 80% if it hadn't been for the voter suppression. So this is a first important fact. It impacts a lot of things of what the regime can do, not do, about the willing and its ability to hold together, to break down, and so on. The second element that's important about the current situation is the incompetence, the in-your-face, the stupidity with which the government stole the election. It's quite astounding, no? That they would just announce a result in a country that is used to see it's all electronic machines. So we're used to see that in no time, when they announce the results, you can get into the website of the Electoral Council and look at every single precinct, every single parish, every single municipality. You can see the results because it's all automated. They didn't publish anything. And they announced a false result. So now we have two problems. The first problem is that they lost an election. The second problem is that they stole an election, right? So stealing is, kind of like a crime, right? And the problem with stealing is that the problem is not just resolved by you returning the money that you stole. Now you have violated the law. You're in a weaker situation, weaker standing. And the third thing the government did is to start a campaign of extreme violation of human rights. The government brags about putting more than 2,000 people in jail. The government puts videos of the people that they put in jail. They catch them because they publish in social media. They are civic leaders and so on. So they film them as they catch them. They film them as they put them in prison, and they put those videos on the web to intimidate people. And over 2,000. They announced over 2,000 people in prison. They have killed over 20 people. And their game is to try to generate panic. Now, internationally, the government has been incredibly isolated.
Let me intervene a bit. So, this is the first impression. So, when even the president of Chile, so there is essentially only some die-hard dictatorial regimes that are back in Maduro.
Exactly.
And even the leftist government of Latin America seems to, even if Calderon, the Mexican position is not clear yet, is it?
No, it is clear. That is, what has happened is the majority of the countries have said, we don't recognize Maduro. We believe it's clear that the election was won by the opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia. Three countries have been kind of like anointed as sort of like the closest, ideologically closest to Maduro, Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia. And everybody else has said, okay, you guys try to negotiate something.
I see. So they are in charge of negotiating.
They are in charge of carrying a conversation, more than a negotiation, a mediation, they call it. And not Chile, because even though Boric, the president of Chile, is quite left-wing, he is quite radically democratic. He said, this is a complete violation of democracy. It's clear that there's fraud. It's clear that they lost the election. It's clear that the opposition, because we were able to collect the receipts of all the precincts, of 83% of the precincts, it's clear that we won by a landslide, 70 to 30, 67 to 30, something on that order of magnitude, a huge landslide. So he said that, and he said that he's violating human rights and that this is unacceptable. And not only that, he's accusing the opposition. This is Boric speaking. He's accusing the opposition of things that would not be crimes in a democratic country. So the kinds of crimes that they are alleging are the kinds of crimes that only exist in dictatorships. Incitación al odio means incitement of hatred, which can mean anything, right? If you say that you dislike, for example, they accused our political leader, Maria Corina Machado, and Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia of having violated the law by announcing an electoral result different from the one announced by the Electoral Council. So anyway, so they're criminalizing everything. So Boric became very radically opposed to what Maduro was doing, and consequently, he could not be asked to mediate. But the three guys who are mediating are Lula in Brazil, Petro in Colombia, and AMLO in Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And they came out essentially with a position. Let me give you two little bits, one more little bit of data. Maduro asked the Supreme Court to decide. He opened the process to ask the Supreme Court to decide what has happened. And that gives him like 30 days. Now, everybody's clear that it is absurd for him to go and complain to the Supreme Court, because what is he complaining about? He could complain to the Supreme Court if the Electoral Council had voted against him. But the Electoral Council anointed him, right? So, but anyway, that gives him kind of 30 days in a process that nobody thinks is constitutional. So the three presidents said this thing of going to the Electoral Council makes no sense. Sorry, to go to the Supreme Court makes no sense. The Electoral Council has to announce the results, has to show the results precinct by precinct. They said people have the right to protest peacefully, and the government has to respect their human rights. And so even vis-a-vis these three countries, he's isolated. The only countries that have recognized him are Cuba, Nicaragua, which are horrible dictatorships, China, Russia, Iran, Belarus, and Turkey. So that's his international support, if you want, which is not negligible, but it's not relevant from the point of view of making Venezuelans believe that the world thinks that Maduro is legitimate. So the message is the world is saying Maduro is illegitimate.
Yes, I have no doubt about that, and in fact that's why I'm not asking you to prove. I mean, it's so overwhelming, and even the leftist government of Latin American are clear, as you said. So I don't think we need to prove it that the election were stolen, and were stolen in a insanely crazy and blatant way. What concerns me is what are the chances of finding a way out. A way out would have to resemble something similar to what happened in Bangladesh, for example, just to stay with recent event. But the recent event in Bangladesh had, as we have learned recently, a key player, the army. The army eventually said, no, we're not going to step in. We're not going to start firing on the people. We're not going to do that. And that forced the president out. What are the chances, given the nature of the Maduro regime, given the history of Chavismo, that something like that happened in Venezuela? As you said, Venezuela has lost 8 million people during these years, which means there is a relatively small but violent and extremely, how can I say, willing to exercise force and brutality minority that is holding the country under control. And the army seems to be, in my understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong, the key component. Or is there a chance that would do? Because I'm not sure that the pressure of other Latin American countries would actually do, given the president.
So the thing is this. The answer is, we never know, and
you don't know.
History will say what's going to happen. But let me give you some interesting facts. First fact: there are some precincts where either only the military vote or mainly the military vote, around military bases, inside military bases, and some things like that. in those precincts, Maduro lost. So he lost in those precincts.
Okay? All right.
So that's a fact. Second fact, the elections are supposed to end at 6 p.m. At 6 p.m., they're supposed to tell the machine to print the results, give a copy of the results to every one of the witnesses from each political party. All of them are supposed to sign it. And then they are supposed to transmit the results to the central electoral system. Okay? So the results were coming in after the closure of the voting booths, and it was obvious that they were losing big. So at around 7:30 p.m., they gave the order of not asking the machines to print and to transmit the results, and they gave the order to kick the witnesses out of the centers. And every single precinct is under military control on the day of the election. And then the great majority of the precincts, the officers did not obey the orders. They obeyed the law. Okay, and that's why we ended up being able to get
knowing the data
of 83% of the centers. Okay, so that's kind of like a second factoid. The third point I would like to make is that if you think as an economist, think of it as a supply curve. Okay, the supply curve of repression. If you ask me for a little repression, maybe the cost is low, but the more repression you ask from me, the more is the cost to me of abiding by your orders. So I would put it to you that we are bound to see people not willing to follow the orders or follow the rules. The first example of that was, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, the ambassador of Venezuela in Mexico, who's a guy who organized the military coup that Chavez made in 1992. So he has credentials as an original Chavista from the time of Chavez's coup in 1992. He came up with a statement saying that the Electoral Council has to print the results, that peace can only be achieved by listening to the will of the people, etc., etc. So that's kind of like a break in their ranks. Somebody who's in government, in an official position, in an important position. So that's just an example of people starting to differentiate themselves. The government even put they put like 14 candidates for president to try to atomize the vote. Candidates that were financed by them and helped by them, because we call them scorpions, alacranes in Venezuela. They were false opposition members. The majority of them have come out to criticize the Electoral Council, to criticize this whole process, to criticize the idea of going to the Supreme Court. They were asked by the Supreme Court to go there to kind of like formalize this inquiry in which the Supreme Court is doing, which makes no sense. They said they came out against it, say no sense, etc. So it is very obvious that except for the super harsh secret police, military intelligence, and so on, the very kind of like elite repression sources, the Attorney General and his office, except for some places in government, there's a lot of discontent. Even it's very circulating in social media. people, for example, the governor of one state, Trujillo, complaining that the people that he took to voted against him, and that even the people who work for him voted against him, and they should all be fired and so on because they voted against him. So it's that they will have to take revenge on way too many people. So the metaphor I like to use is that the government has like a terminal cancer. But, when people die of cancer, they don't really die of cancer. They die some complication caused by cancer. The cancer increases your fragility. Maybe it impacts your immune system and you die from an infection. Maybe it impacts your respiratory system. It impacts something that causes.
And eventually you give in. I understand. But the question is,
so
how much?
I say their political base is extremely, extremely narrow, and it's public information. I know that it's very narrow, but I know, and you know, and I know that you know, and I know, and everybody knows. So under those conditions, it's very hard to keep power. And that's why, even if it's hard for you to imagine how he falls, it's even harder to imagine how he stays.
I understand. I understand. The problem is that, both you and I have learned that when they are in that situation, they know they have no way out. So let's hope the three, how can I say, mediator will offer him a way out, a flight out, some money, some solution for the bodies, the worst, the more, involved people in the regime and so on. But because otherwise, we know that these kind of people react in a very bloody way.
One of the bad things that has happened is that if you said, Maduro, he has to leave, etc., he's involved, but Maduro contaminated the Electoral Council. So now the Electoral Council has committed a huge fraud in front of the whole world. So that's first thing. So the Electoral Council is contaminated. Then the Attorney General has been acting on a bunch of repression.
Illegal orders. Yeah.
So he is contaminated. The Supreme Court is acting to kind of like legitimate the fraud. So they are contaminated. Even before the Electoral Council announced the results, the Minister of Defense, surrounded by the High Command, came out saying, the people voted, the decision is clear, anti-colonialism won, fascism lost, etc. So Chavez lives, etc. So he gave like a political speech saying that they are behind the victory of Maduro. Okay,
right. So they're all into it. That's the point.
Yeah, but that's the High Command. That's the High Command, right? So, but you're right in saying, look, all the structures of the power at the top have not only committed crimes over the last 25 years, but are behind this self-coup that is associated with the stealing of the election as of since Sunday, July 28th. So now you have that the whole structure of the state at the top is contaminated with these crimes. So it won't be just one person leaving. It kind of like will require some kind of reimagining of a transitory institutionality to help Venezuela return to a democratic regime with independent leaders and so on and so forth.
Are there forces within the country that can take that? Is there, I don't know, what the situation is in terms of the bureaucratic elite in Caracas and other capitals and other cities?
Well, I mean, let me say one of the points of strength. The reason why we have 83% of the printed results is because Maria Corina and her movement created an organization with 600,000 people in each, say 10 people per precinct or more.
Yep.
To make sure that the results were printed, to make sure that the results were taken, digitalized, sent, taken physically, and transported. So it's a whole national organization that was involved in being able to prove the fraud. And that shows that on this side, there is organizational capacity that spans the whole country. So that suggests that it was not like jingles and stuff.
No, I understand. Yeah, there is a civil society that has organized itself as a state.
So that's one piece of stability. But Maduro has decimated the state. Just it's interesting to remember that GDP today is 1/4 of the GDP that the country had when Maduro got to power in 2013. This is the biggest recession that has ever happened in human history outside of war. And it's bigger than that of most wars, including the First World War, the Second World War, the Spanish Civil War. It's 2.5 times the U.S. Great Depression. So it's a catastrophe of incredible proportions, and that means that the education system, the health system, the electricity system, the tax system, whatever, all of the systems of a state have imploded. Even the currency has imploded. It's interesting to know that Maduro...
Well, those implode quite quickly in Latin America, so they tend to implode first.
Maduro took 11 zeros out of the currency. He took 5 zeros out of the currency, and 3.5 years later took 6 zeros out of the currency. So it means that, say, 100 billion bolivars have become one. 100 bolivars become one. And that's
he knows how to divide.
That's not counting the 3 zeros that Chavez took out of the currency. So between the two, they took 14 zeros out of the currency. So that gives you it's 100 trillion. It's an astronomical number. So they've destroyed many of the institutions of the country. They've destroyed the oil company. When Chavez got elected in 1998, the country was producing 3.4 million barrels of oil. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in OPEC, in the world, actually.
In the world, yeah.
If we had kept our market share, say in the agreements, if we had kept our market share, we should be producing more than 6 million barrels of oil a day, closer to 7 million barrels of oil a day. Instead, today we're producing, say, like 700,000.
Right, it's a tenth.
A tenth.
So it's better than the currency.
So it is an amazing capacity to destroy. But there's a healthy society there, and that healthy society is expressed in the fact that in less than 24 hours, they were able to put all the receipts of all the precincts on the web.
That was pretty impressive. That was an impressive display of organization and self-confidence also, because you take.
So there is capacity in that society. There is capacity, but not in the state. And this is something which I would blame a little bit economists, if you want, for not having talked enough about this. In economic parlance, we think that things are made with capital and labor, And, the important thing is who owns capital, who owns the capital, right? And that gave Maduro and Chavez the impression that the important thing was ownership. And, so he expropriated everything left and right. He expropriated not only oil companies and oil service companies and the steel companies and the cement companies and banks and telecoms and electricity companies and millions of hectares of agricultural land, etc. They expropriated many things, thinking that now that the people own, income will be somehow redistributed and so on. What they do not realize is that the most important asset in an economy is know-how. In order to do something, you have to know how to do it. And know-how resides in brains, and only in brains. And that you cannot expropriate. So every time they expropriated something, it imploded. Some of them just closed down completely, to zero. Others, so not a tenth, zero. So, but that's in some sense because in their worldview, the idea that they need to use the know-how that is in society, and to use it, they need to empower that society with rights. And if you take away those rights, for example, he took over the oil company, the national oil company. He took away their meritocratic rights. They went on strike. He fired everybody. He fired 20,000 people. That's what's behind the collapse in oil production. That he destroyed the human capital that was built to run these organizations. And so a big reconstruction effort will have to come, but it's different to reconstruct when the fundamental asset, know-how, is out there in society, and that you just need to empower them. You have to give them rights so that they can endeavor, plan, invest, etc. And I think you might have a very relatively rapid recovery because we actually know how to be 4 times richer than we are. We haven't forgotten. We have been impeded. So an empowered society is likely to generate a big transformation.
One last question. How about the 8 million you've been talking about? The particular amount of running away has been in the last few years. I mean, so much so that in spite of a still relatively high fertility, the population of Venezuela has been declining in the last few years dramatically. Yeah. You think those people that are probably, in some sense, relatively more prepared and more advantaged, that ran away and found a way to do things around the world, will come back in case, or are coming back, or are players in this in the future of the country, or they're gone?
So I must say, number one is that in every society that goes through a crisis, it generates a diaspora, and the diaspora doesn't fully return. No, there's a component of the diaspora that stays outside for the long run. But diasporas have a potential huge effect on the domestic economy. They connect the country intellectually, they connect the country professionally, it's associated with flows of investment, flows of trade.
Connection, right? Yes.
Yeah. So
yours is gigantic. I mean, 7-8 million out of 30. What is that, Venezuela? 30, 31?
Venezuela, it should have been like 34, and it's probably 26 now, something like that. And
it's 28 now. It's 28 million people.
Well, we don't know. We don't know because I don't think that the Venezuelan
census find the counting correct.
Of the. So we don't really know, and we know that fertility rates have been imploding, and people have been leaving. So So there's probably a big decline in population. But the good thing about the people that have left is that instead of, being only exposed to this stagnant, imploding economy, they have been exposed to different ways of doing business, different organizational forms, different technologies, different experiences, different industries. I think they can have the effect of really diversifying the knowledge set of the country, and it can play a very significant role as an accelerator of the recovery. I've done work in several countries that have diasporas and have studied the impact of those diasporas on the local economy, both in cross-national things and in case studies on Colombia, on Ethiopia, on Sri Lanka, on Albania. So I hope that the diaspora plays a very important role. Let me just, in addition, say that the issue of kicking out Maduro so that the 8 million people can return was the most important theme of the election.
Imagine.
So this people feel that the loss of these 8 million people, or the departure, it means that every family has grandparents without grandchildren, or children without their parents, or so it's something that has never happened, has broken up families, and this is resented deeply in Venezuela, and people associate that with Maduro.
All right. Well, Ricardo, the picture you painted is clear. What do you think? One last thing, and then we close. In closing words, what can you tell the Italians? What apart from obviously supporting on social networks, what do you think would be acts from European governments that would help a transition in the right direction? What could be the most important gesture?
So number one, I think an expression of thanks. Both the Italian government and the European government have decided not to recognize the election and to demand the publication of detailed information. And given the loss of credibility of the Electoral Council, they have asked for international verification of the results. That is fine, but time is going on. It's been over a week since the election,
right?
And we're not seeing action on the side of the government. So at some point in time, you have to take another decision of saying, well, the Electoral Council did not show the results, did not accept international supervision. So what do you do then? I think that then it has to be clear that they do not recognize the Maduro government. They do not recognize the Maduro ambassadors. They do not recognize Maduro representatives in the UN or in the organization, other international bodies, right? They are excluded from them, from the International Monetary Fund, right? And so we need to exclude them. It would be great if you recognized the winner, Edmundo Gonzalez, recognize him as winner, and provide him with a legitimacy that will be an asset in terms of his ability to facilitate the reunification of the political apparatus to reflect the reunification of the people's will. So I think, and then let's be creative. Let's think, how are the ways in which the world can help democracies when they are blatantly stolen by despots, and the world may need more tools for the collective defense of democracy. We have them in the Americas. There's we call it the Democratic Charter that was agreed by the Organization of American States, and it creates some instruments to act. Let's hope that the international community can find ways to facilitate the return to democracy in Venezuela.
All right, Frank, thanks, Ricardo. Thank you for your time, and let's monitor the situation. And if you have time, maybe in a few weeks, we can see where it's going. Thanks.
Grazie mille.
Grazie mille, dottore. Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao.